We are recording. It is September 3. Welcome to Service APIs meeting for September 3, and welcome to September, everyone. We're making good progress here. For those of you who were at office hours yesterday, this release checklist is going to look really familiar. It's slightly out of date. I think some of these PRs have merged since then, maybe even this one. We'll see. No, not quite yet. Okay. But we're making good progress on the TLS front. On the advanced routing front, I think we're almost done. Backend policy, I think we're almost done. Same with UDP route. Most of these, all of these have PRs at this point, and they're either LGTM'd or close to it. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I think we're in a good place. What I did want to cover today was potentially new work, and that is based on some what I thought was really helpful feedback from Tim and some from Dan as well. I think we've already responded to a lot of Dan's feedback, but I did want to include some of that in here that maybe we hadn't properly addressed yet. And so I created a doc that I think everyone should be able to see this. It's linked in the agenda at this point. And for context, last Friday, I went through this API with Tim for a couple hours and reviewed top to bottom, got some really good feedback. And I'd taken some notes and I cleaned those up and tried to turn them into kind of actionable things. And there are, as much as I started creating issues for some of them, there are just too many small, things here that probably don't require an issue or a single PR per bullet point kind of thing. So I wanted to go through, and if there are some things that we're all in consensus on, maybe we can, combine a few fixes into a single PR. But anyways, with that said, I wanted to provide just a bit of background as far as what that feedback was. So this is, a lot of these are really tiny things, but I thought this was helpful. I know I've heard this from Tim before, but I haven't been thinking about it as I've been reviewing code. But one of Tim's preferences is for easier API reviews, type should always appear in the order they're referenced. So as an example, gateway includes listener and a variety of other things. So in the gateway file, it would be helpful if gateway showed up first, followed immediately by listener, followed by whatever listener references and so on. So it's easier to process as you're reading through the types definitions. I did create an issue for this. The concern with this one is it's going to create a lot of conflicts. So yeah, we can time this when there aren't quite as many things in flux. But if you're working on anything new, just keep this general principle in mind. Another one that would end up, changing a lot of different places is that we should really have a max length for every list, map, or string. And this makes a lot of sense. You don't want to have, an infinite max anywhere. So, and we can always increase the max if people are bumping up against it. But it would be good to have a starting point of we support up to, whatever arbitrary number it is as a starting point. I think this makes sense. It'll take a while to get every potential value here correct. And I should also say, if at any point anyone has feedback or thoughts, definitely interrupt me, because there's a lot of different things to go through here. Okay. The other thing, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Rob, I was just going to ask, you were mentioning like issue 291 as an example. You wanted to hold off on that, or I'm just looking at these ones you created. Should we not pick them up?
No, I mean, I think they're good to pick up. I would just, be cautious of the potential for rebasing. I think Gateway may be in a stable place, so maybe it actually probably is safe to rearrange that file. But if, for example, route or especially TLS config, we've got a lot of changes going. We've got, I don't know, several PRs open related to route or related to TLS config right now. And so if you created a PR that was rearranging, everything in that type's definition, you're going to end up conflicting or rebasing with all the existing open PRs related to that. I think Gateway is actually probably fine, so that's a good clarification. I don't think there's much open on this one. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is probably a good example of something like you could start on. I'll say if you're interested in contributing, this is a bucket list of things that would be great to get some help with. There's a long list of relatively small but helpful fixes here.
Yeah, that sounds great, especially just getting started. So thanks for the clarification there.
Yep, appreciate it. Tim thought that defaulting config map here is probably not a great idea or user experience for extension ref. And the rationale was if you see an extension ref and you just see a name, it's not obvious to most people that means, oh, this is a config map, right? And I know defaulting, if you're, it will eventually show up, but if you're looking at the manifest in a YAML file somewhere, as an example, this is one particular instance where the default doesn't exactly make sense. I went into a little bit more issue. I actually created more detail. I actually created an issue for this one. And the idea of, defaulting to a config map feels different than defaulting to secrets, because for secrets, you've got, as an example, TLS certificates. That's almost always going to be secret ref. For forward to, that's almost always going to be a service ref. So a name kind of sort of makes sense there. I'm not as sold on, and Tim wasn't as sold on the idea that a config map would be a really common extension point, or at least sufficient of being a default. But yeah, anyways, so if anyone, and these are just feedbacks, that doesn't mean it's, if these are just pieces of feedback, it doesn't mean that any one of these things has to be the way it is. If anyone wants to push for a different approach here, definitely let me know, speak up, whatever. The next bit of feedback is, was a question around why we're using resource and reference types. And the standard has traditionally been kind. And I think, I don't see Micah on this call, but maybe Danian, do you remember the discussion around this one?
I remember Micaiah making reference to some upstream issue that had a lot of dialogue around when it's a reference using a resource as opposed to kind. But I don't remember the details.
Right, and so my thought was, if we're going to stick with this, we should at least document it, because I've seen this confusion several times already, and this does not feel standard yet, even if it is technically better. I believe, I did some digging to try and find the source, and I think it comes back to this David Eads commit, where he added all the reasons not to use object reference, the shared object reference type, and specifically says, in most cases, the dependency is on the group resource tuple, not group kind. Kind is not a precise mapping. So I think that's reasonable, but I don't know how many people will have read this. So I imagine a lot of APIs, like all existing Kubernetes references, seem to be kind. And I'd imagine that new APIs will also miss this point hidden in the comment on object reference somewhere as well. So if we do think group resource is the way to do it, then we should really document why and that it is a pattern. That's, yeah, my thoughts there. Does anyone feel strongly one way or another as far as the group resource pattern versus group kind? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I know it. I mean, my inclination was using kind just because it's natural, right? It's the way that things have been done. And to your point, even if using the resource is technically a better approach, it does require a new way of thinking. So, so is there an issue open to kind of look at that again and decide whether?
This is all I have right now. I would love some additional feedback on this one. That's 293.
Can you tag Micaiah on that? And when I talk to him, I'll bring it up. And yeah, I think it's worth discussing some more.
It's amazing. He has a one name GitHub handle. That's, yeah, cool. Then this is really related. I have not created an issue yet. And I think this is the same kind of idea. Tim suggested that instead of redefining condition every time, we could just use the meta v1 condition type. That seems reasonable to me. I did look, because obviously the reason we're not using the standard object reference is because of that, that PR that says, don't use this, create your own, whatever. But I looked just, out of, curiosity to see if there was any similar warning on the, meta v1 condition type, and I can't find one anywhere. So it makes me think we probably could clean up all our custom conditions and just use the standard meta v1 condition. I don't know why we defined our own conditions, but this was an interesting bit of feedback. Yeah. Okay, so next, these are all going to be pretty quick, I think. Controller spec and validation should line up with ingress class. The current documentation, current Go doc around the controller spec does not completely line up with ingress class. And related to that, Dan had a comment that it wasn't entirely clear to him what controller actually meant there, coming from the previous concept of, say, ingress class, which had a slightly different meaning, ingress class, the annotation that is. And so just being very clear in our documentation what referring to controller actually means. It's fairly limited right now, so there's room for improvement here. For allowed gateway namespace selector, there were a couple bits of feedback. He was, thinking about, is there any other way we can do this? Because obviously this feels not ideal. We talked about potentially quota, can't find a way to make that work. I'm going to take it on myself to try and reach out to someone in SIGAuth again to follow up if they have any other ideas as far as this one. And at the very least, he was asking, can we come up with a shorter or simpler name? And this is a tiny improvement, but now that we're removing allowed route namespaces from here, and so we didn't have the one as a selector and one isn't a selector problem, I can get rid of at least the selector suffix on the name. This is a really tiny change, but it helps a little bit. So anyways, that was one small update there. For gateway class, he pointed out correctly that we're using just a single class name as the field, and we should be using gateway class name that matches ingress class name, storage class name, what's used elsewhere. We just didn't do it correctly, or I'm guessing it was probably me, to be honest. I can't remember. But I created a PR to update this to match everything that is already in existence in Kubernetes. This one I think is also a really easy one to pick up. I have not picked it up. I've not created an issue. But on the listener port, we have some KubeBuilder validation that has a min, max, and then exclusive maximum, exclusive minimum. And it's kind of confusing. And I think both Dan and Tim had the comment that this is confusing. Can we at least comment what the actual interpreted range from this validation is in a single comment? And so if anyone wants to go through and just add a comment here explaining what these bits of validation actually translate to in terms of a real range, I think that would be helpful. More of a abstract thing that I don't have a good answer for was if we wanted to have not just a port number, but a port name for SRV records. I don't have a good answer or use case for this one. Does anyone feel strongly one way or the other?
I'm not sure I understand the question here.
So in Kubernetes DNS, I had to look this up as well. In Kubernetes DNS, we add an entry to DNS that is prefixed with the port name, so that I think will target that specific. I actually don't know.
I see. But yeah, that makes sense. But I think we have made a distinction here of how a gateway is deployed into the network is orthogonal to the gateway resource itself, right? Because the gateway resource does not actually add in any kube proxy, or I mean,
you're right.
Right. So we don't need to be worried about that in gateway.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay. The next one is yes. I think we do need some kind of support for a CNAME or DNS type here for a gateway address. We just have not provided one at this point. But I think there are some load balancers, like at least ELB, where we will need some concept of this.
We do have that, right? We provide like a named or IP.
So yeah, we have IP and we have named address. And named address, as I understand it, is interpreted as a named IP address, so like a static IP. But it is not actually CNAME or DNS, despite what it might sound like.
Interesting. I assumed it was CNAME. So
right. Yeah. Okay. Let's. Okay, so we're getting down to the end here. I know really early on in this API design, we had considered nested routes, the idea that a route can then target other routes, which can then target other routes. I think we still have room for that, but it would be relatively complicated, and I think it's fine to leave for post V1 Alpha 1, but it's worth at least thinking about again and thinking about how that could potentially fit in the future, because it is a cool idea, at least. Tim was wondering if we could get rid of the regex path match and the idea was, you know, any implementation that can handle regex would probably already have a way of accomplishing that with some kind of custom prefix or format or whatever to indicate that this is a regex. So you might be able to accomplish that just with an implementation specific approach. I can't remember what our reasoning was here. Maybe it was just ease of use, or Harry, do you remember?
Yeah, so I think the purpose of having like specifically regular expression is it's in an interesting space where we can't put it in the extended space because you have like POSIX and PCRE largely popular. I think there might be a couple more engines, but like if you have implementations that have, you know, that follow one of those engines, then you could still have some amount of, you know, portability, right? So having that regular expression type is sort of a like, you know, if somebody is reviewing, okay, I want to go from vendor A to vendor B, you know, they can sort of pick up like, okay, regular expression, okay, maybe we can just reuse this in this other vendor B as well, right? So that was sort of the expression. I think
Yeah,
Bo
I
is
just
trying
had a
to.
thought.
Bo, you're a robot.
Is it better if I keep speaking? Is it get better?
I can kind of understand you. It's not great, but I can mostly understand you.
Okay. I won't waste too much time. This is terrible. But basically, one thing we can do is just say this is regular expression and the meaning is specific to the implementation, just as it's so common. But we don't necessarily want like to, it's just a fool's errand to try to like make it the actual syntax be portable.
Yeah, and that's what it is right now. And I know Tim was not sold on removing it. He just wanted to make sure we had clear reasoning for having it. And I think the balance of just clearly defining that each implementation may use a different flavor of regex, and so this isn't fully portable, seems like a reasonable compromise. Okay, cool. Yeah, Tim had a question about our domain match type and just how loose it was. Like, can we match just a .com? Is that valid under that domain match type? And if not, we may need some clearer documentation around what this can and cannot be used for. I actually can't remember. I know we don't specify right now. So this is not something we need to answer at this point, but another place that could be a good follow-up. And then this is a really, really easy follow-up. I actually, yeah, I have this in both places, but the idea that when you're doing any kind of match type or any kind of type like this at all, it is preferable to have the most specific first. So his suggestion was to have exact first and then gradually less specific types after that. And another related and very easy addition, for a hostname match, it only makes sense to validate a max length of 253. So yeah. And then for headers, he had some really good questions around the case sensitivity. I think this is probably the best question that we don't have a good answer for right now. So we have said that keys are case insensitive. It's great. But how do we handle two identical keys that happen to have different cases and different values? So you have, you know, an all uppercase version and an all lowercase version, and they both match different values, but our keys are meant to be case insensitive. That is currently not defined anywhere. And it would be good to define, or maybe we need to, I don't know, maybe we need to add some validation that requires that all keys are lowercase, as an example. I don't know.
What does YAML do when it has key collision in the map?
Something about key collision, say that again.
What does the YAML do if you have key collision?
You know, it would do nothing if the key collision is not actually a collision. Like it, well, I think
Yeah,
I think
but
you can
like
have different
it's actually a
cases.
collision.
I thought YAML was case sensitive. That's a good question.
No, YAML is case sensitive. I'm just wondering what does YAML do, because you can do that with at the YAML layer. Like if you had a repeated key, what does it do? It just throws away one of them.
Well, sure, but the question isn't if you have repeated identical keys. It's if you have, so identical may not be the right word, but if you have foo, bar, and foo.
That's right. I'm just saying, so YAML have one behavior, and if we impose a different behavior, it would get confusing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, is it reasonable to just
One thing is that
validate?
you can already do foo bar. You can already do foo bar twice, can't you?
Right, yes.
Which is the
Like this, you mean?
Yeah.
Like you're saying this is valid YAML? Is that what you're saying?
Is it not valid YAML?
I'm not sure.
So what YAML will do usually is, it will take the last key and apply that. So it would be foo bars that is applied instead of foo bar. It depends on the parser, but I think that's what Kubernetes does.
Okay.
I'm just saying, this seems pretty easy we just need to define a behavior. We should just make sure it's not confusing, given that YAML has filtering for identity.
Yeah, well, it's especially confusing because, this is going to get parsed into a map, and maps do not have consistent ordering, obviously. And so you can't, like when you're reading a file, when you're parsing YAML, you can base this on order. Whereas when you're iterating through a map, it's probably less clear. Yeah, I don't know. I can. This feels like one that's going to be trickier, so I'll create a follow-up issue for this one. Okay, we need better documentation around what happens when match doesn't exist. This feels reasonably straightforward. We just have not defined when there is no default match, what a controller should do. Then one more thing, I know we're taking a lot of time here. Do we want header matching to be in a list? I know this has already come up. I think E may have suggested it. I think a couple other people have suggested this as well. The idea that header matching could be in a list, so you could have, say, an exact match followed by a prefix match or some such thing like that. Because right now our header matching is only a single type at a time. I think this was a reasonably popular idea. Was there any reason not to support an approach like this? Harry, I feel like you may have the most recent context on this one.
Yes, I'm thinking I mean, we can define this. It's like we're trying to have an API which has like sort of the lowest common denominator. So,
but isn't match already plural?
you
Right,
can
I guess.
define. Go ahead, Rob.
I guess what the problem is right now is there's no way for a single match to say, I want a header to equal this, and I want a different header to start with this. There's no way
Yeah,
to do that in a single match.
correct. Yeah, there is. Yeah, you can have exact matches on multiple headers. Okay. Yeah, that I can see. Okay. That's interesting. We'll have to think more about it.
Okay, I'll create a follow-up on this one. For filters, I think you know, it wasn't entirely clear to what type was for when extension ref is used. Does it refer to just, is the type just extension, or is it referring to the name of the CRD that is being referenced, or is it, you know, we could have some better documentation on how type should be interpreted in this use case.
I'll take that up. Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you. And the other one, the other conversation here was around ordering. The idea that there are going to be some filters that need to be, you know, executed in a very specific order by some implementations. So, you know, basically making it very clear that, and I think we already do a reasonably good job at indicating that the order that is specified for filters is not necessarily the order that implementations will choose, but maybe an example of what that might look like, or just a little bit more depth into how that variation could be introduced would be helpful. And then the last one was Tim mentioned that, you know, I think forward to filters for TCP route just kind of happened accidentally, and they don't necessarily make sense. It's because the idea, you know, forward to is a type that's shared by TCP route and HTTP route, and separate filters in TCP route in the forward to really just didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So he thought, well, why don't we just have different forward to types for different routes? I think that makes sense. I agree that filters, I can't think of a great use case for filters inside the TCP route forward to specifically.
Yeah, I think more generally, we should only add filters where we know or we have a good experience of how they will be used, or, you know, we have good use cases. So even I would go as far as, you know, we shouldn't have filters in types other than HTTP route, and, you know, then incrementally add that in, just to make sure, you know, we are not having an API that, you know, we don't really know of what some fields do.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, great. Anyone want to volunteer to follow up with this one? Okay, I'll create a follow-up issue then, and let whoever wants to take this one on take it on. Okay, so that was a lot of feedback. If you want to review any of it on your own, feel free. This doc should be accessible to anyone. Not all of these are going to have a follow-up issue. I think a lot of these are, you know, easy to do in small little PRs, or you could combine a few. If you want to volunteer for something, like maybe just, and there's not an issue already created for it, you could create an issue, or you could just comment on this doc and say, I'm going to take this chunk of, you know, whatever. And yeah, contributions are awesome. I know we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to highlight one PR rather selfishly. And this is one that I've had around for a little bit, but it's become a lot simpler now. And it fixes a rather, I actually haven't updated the description to indicate this, but as I was building this yesterday, I ran into a rather significant bug in our makefile setup. And at some point, unfortunately, we removed code generation. So if you happen to remove a field, or rename a field, this renames a field, things are going to break, or well, verification is going to fail because CodeGen never updated. And so I ran into that, and I couldn't understand why make generate wasn't making a difference. And it turns out that we removed just a little bit too much here. So anyways, this fixes it. I have a follow-up issue that I created that suggests, oh yeah, I have an issue here. So we can fix this in an isolated PR, and that's completely fine for me. I needed to fix it in my own PR just because, and this PR felt really reasonably close, and I think there's close to consensus on this one. So if anyone wants to take a look at this, if there's issues, we can, I don't mind creating a separate PR. I needed to fix it here.
Yeah, I'll clean up the makefile part. I broke it, so I'll fix it.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'll get to it on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's fine. And my stretch goal here was this issue here, which we have two makefiles, and they're fine. It's, you know, legacy from Kube Builder generation, but we have since modified our makefiles, and it's not entirely clear why some things are in one makefile versus the other makefile. And I think it's time that we just merge them all back into a single makefile. I think that would be easier to track, and we'd be less likely to have these kinds of bugs where, you know, like, because, you know, there's PRs that modify two different makefiles, and you think, well, it's not here, but it must be there because everything still works. And no, it doesn't. Yeah.
Can you assign that issue to me, Rob?
Sure.
Thanks.
Thanks for volunteering. Cool. Yeah, and then we only have just a few minutes left. Oh, it looks like, Jeremy, you just updated your UDP route PR, it looks like.
Yeah, I saw that it needs rebase.
That's amazing, thank you. Yes, heads up for everyone, rebasing is going to be painful probably. Jeremy, how painful was it to rebase after all the proto stuff had been removed?
Substantially less painful. Of course, I had I didn't notice that it had been removed until I did the rebase, and so then I had to go delete a bunch of things. But deleting is way easier than fixing. So
yeah. Okay, well that's good to hear. Yeah, I think it was just yesterday that the PR removing all our proto-related stuff merged, and so that means everyone's going to have to rebase once. But after that, I think rebases are going to become less common and definitely less painful. So something to be excited about on that front. I know this already has approval. I think it had an LGTM even before. I'll take a look right after this, and hopefully we can get it in. Thanks for another rebase. I know rebased a few times.
No problem.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think there's enough time to really get into any one issue here. So I am leaning towards just ending this just a couple minutes early, unless anyone has any last topic that they'd really like to bring to attention.
Yeah, I have one thing, and I don't know
Okay.
if so we get a lot of LGTMs, but then we sort of, Bowie probably has limited bandwidth. So how can we speed that process up? Because like, is there anything we can do in the immediate term, like any solution of pinging? I hate to ping on Slack, like these PRs already keep.
Yeah, ping me. I hope you can hear me. One way is ping me, and if people are actively reviewing it and it looks like it's okay, I will try to approve so that people can just GTM. If you can ping me every day, and I will try to make that happen. But then we don't have to wait for approved and no GTM back and forth. But if I see people are actively reviewing it and it looks in the right direction, then I'll try to preemptively approve it.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Bowie. I just wanted to make sure if.
Yeah, so please know it's like, oh, this discussion is going the right way, and it feels like we can just GTM, after the discussion, but it's approved. And that makes it easier. Sometimes I'm looking at the conversation and it looks like there's still conversation, but I didn't want to just approve it, so like, and the LGTM would kind of push it through.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Bowie.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, that's a good question. We have had a ton of PRs come in. I'm thrilled with that and excited about the progress we're making. And anyone who's interested in contributing, especially new contributors, don't hesitate to reach out on Slack for any help. I know our dev documentation is not always the best. Actually, it's just not the best. So anyways, but thanks so much for everyone's time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and or weekend. Talk to you next week.
Thanks. You too. See you.